Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's webinar on planning and managing safe excursions for CareMonkey schools and clients. My name is David Griffiths. I'm Managing Director and Co-founder of ComplySpace, and I'll be running your webinar today. This webinar is being recorded, and in the coming days we will provide you with a link to a recording of the webinar should you wish to review it once again and or send it to any of your colleagues to review and have a listen to. Should you have any questions during the course of the webinar, I'd urge you to use the questions tool in the webinar software on GoToMeeting, or to submit your questions or comments via the landing page, the URL of which I'll give you at the end of the webinar. I won't answer questions during the webinar, but what we'll do is collate them and then answer them in the next 2 or 3 days for you all to give you an FAQ sheet or something along those lines. So do feel free to interact and provide any questions or comments as we go. Just a quick overview of what I'm going to take you through in the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to run through some of the common challenges in excursion planning and risk management. We'll look at how we're solving this, and I'll run you through a series of steps that we've taken around that. I'll talk about our partnership with the good folk at CareMonkey and the great service that they provide to schools and other clients around Australia, and then I'll do a demo of an integrated solution with CareMonkey to show you how that can all come together. Quick bit on ComplySpace, however, for those that don't know us, our vision in life, if you like, is to simplify risk, compliance and policy management for schools and other organisations so that they can focus on what it is they do. And for schools, that's about teaching and caring for students. And really importantly, in the context of safe excursions, this is both inside and outside the classroom and the school gate. Some of the common challenges that we've seen over time across our 650 or so client schools around Australia around excursion risk management and planning, we've broken those challenges into about 5 different key areas. Number one that we've observed over time is paper-based risk assessments. It's always very challenging for schools to complete risk assessments consistently on each excursion. We see a broad spectrum of different types of paper-based risk assessments that are completed, bearing in mind that we're asking, in many cases, teachers to undertake those risk assessments, and these are always people that are very time poor and are very busy. We've also seen that the second key challenge, that there are no set standards or guidelines and around Australia in particular around good excursion risk management. We do see different departments providing activity-based policies and controls, but there's no set way in which schools are expected to complete their risk assessments and to meet a certain standard. We also see the challenge around having tailored risk assessments for each excursion. And I just emphasise that point. Every single excursion you go on needs a unique risk assessment for it. Of course, many excursions are similar to each other, and you might undertake a Year 4 excursion to the same location that you did for last year's Year 4. However, this year's Year 4 might have different capacity and a different profile of student in it, and therefore it raises different risks along the way. So we need to undertake, at a bare minimum, unique risk assessments for each unique excursion. Huge challenge that we see is that teachers are experts in teaching. They're not necessarily experts in the function or discipline of risk management. And I find this quite interesting because I've been working with schools for around 8 or 9 years only, but in my experience, I've found that teachers are indeed experts in managing risk. They manage risk every single day. What they don't do, though, is show that they're necessarily managing those risks to a structured methodology. And that's a lot of what we see challenges, and we try to help schools show how good they are at doing these things these days. So teachers don't necessarily know what they need to know in order to undertake proper and comprehensive risk assessments, which seems a little unfair that we're expecting them to do so much. So enabling them to do that properly with the right tools is one of our key goals. Finally, the final step is that we're dealing with very time-poor people. So having a process that's not necessarily user-friendly can be hugely challenging and demotivating for teachers who simply want to be able to take their students on an excursion for a good educational outcome. Now, the people who we serve and attempt to support and assist through providing our services really come down to two different sets of people. Number one is the teachers themselves. So by simplifying the excursions and providing support and a better system and a better service around this, where it seems a bit trite to say this, but we're seeking to give some time back to teachers and save some frustration from them. In truth, I think that is, as I said, a little bit trite. I think the truth is what we're really doing is we're really enabling teachers to fulfill their good intentions. Okay? I've not yet come across a teacher that doesn't want to run a safe and well-managed excursion. So by providing the right tools and support to those teachers, we're enabling them to fulfill their best intentions there. Similarly with approvers, exactly the same thing. It's providing the visibility needed, the steps, checks and measures needed for them to feel confident and to see an efficiency, but most importantly, again, they want to administer and approve only the safest excursions in their school to ensure that students and teachers and others are kept as safe as possible so that they can enjoy that educational experience. So what are we doing in relation to this? Well, we've developed a excursion risk management software application called Plan Check Go. We've integrated Plan Check Go with CareMonkey, and it becomes an integrated online tool that enables schools to manage safe excursions and thereby minimize risk for all involved in that excursion. Plan Check Go, essentially the key functions, features and benefits of Plan Check Go can be broken into 4 different areas. Firstly, it provides a centralized place for excursion management for teachers and approvers. Second key feature or benefit is that it simplifies the excursion planning and risk assessment, risk management process for those teachers and approvers. Really importantly, the next key feature is that it provides a comprehensive risk assessment that is unique for each and every excursion. So go back to that challenge of no tailored risk assessments, or the challenge around tailored risk assessments. Plan Check Go enables the teacher to complete a comprehensive risk assessment in a fairly straightforward manner that is unique for each and every excursion. And finally, following that risk assessment, Plan Check Go delivers the key control checklists and policies that are needed to help control those risks that have been identified in the assessment itself. These checklists and policies are created dynamically as we go through step by step and build our excursion profile. So I'm going to show you how that works in a second. And when I use language like dynamic, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about in the way that it evolves and builds out the risk checklists and policies. There's 3 different types of, or I guess, essential cogs in the machine of Plan Check Go. There's risk content, there's workflow, and then there's a provider management and due diligence piece that goes in there. Those 3 combine to create and automate a unique and comprehensive risk assessment at the back end of that. When we talk about risk content in Plan Check Go, there are 3 different types. And this is the dynamic creation of those 3. Firstly, there's the checklists for activities and so forth that are being undertaken on an excursion. Secondly, there are the policies. Thirdly, there's the unique risk assessment. Look, really importantly, we are essentially a content provider as a business. So for the checklists and policies, our editorial team and subject matter experts in our business keep this content up to date for changes in law and best practice for excursion management, and that's part of the ongoing service that Plan Check Go provides. So that's a really important point to make around maintaining content, the currency of checklist and policy content. Now, the content itself, we've mapped, actually it's closer to 130 different activities now, and have built from those 130 odd activities 51 different control policies, closer to 50 checklists that help to control those different activities, that help to control the 60 odd risks that come from those activities. So risk assessments and the 250 risks that are covered by those different activities. So you can see that's a fairly comprehensive set of numbers in there. And just to dig a little deeper and outline the nature of those activities that we've reviewed and researched extensively, we've broken them into 5 different categories. And you can see there: athletics, aquatics, outdoor ed, recreational activities, and sports activities. You can also see the depth of the different activities that have been research reviewed and built out in Plan Check Go. And it's probably pretty interesting for your schools to look at, because some of those activities you might consider undertaking as you get to know this, and others you might say, well, actually, no, we don't want to do them for different reasons. If you have a look, and there are activities there that I'd never actually heard of until we dived in and started building this product. And if you look at the column second from the right under school sports, about 6 or 7 up, there's a sport called korfball. Now, if you don't know what korfball is, I'd urge you to Google it, and I'll give you a little hint. It's not a bad sport for a co-educational school to undertake. And as I found out more about korfball, I saw that the Netherlands won the recent Korfball World Cup in a hard-fought final against Belgium about 12 days ago. So go and Google korfball and consider it for your school. And if you use Plan Check Go, that will help you to undertake a risk assessment in relation to that activity. In relation to the risk assessment, the excursion level, Plan Check Go produces a comprehensive and tailored risk assessment depending on the profile and characteristics of your excursion. Really importantly, this slide, the text on it is a little small on the sub-risks there, but we've built out what we call a cascading risk methodology for the risk assessment. So when we pick on something like the risk associated with swimming, of course, swimming, there are many, many sub-risks associated with swimming. We've built out all of those sub-risks beneath that, and those sub-risks, importantly, all of the checklist-based and policy-based controls that are in place help to mitigate and control those sub-risks, and therefore they lead to the overall risk assessment of what we'd call the parent risk, being the main swimming risk. Of course, we don't expect teachers to go through and rate every single sub-risk. That would be far too complex. What we've built in here is a much simpler structure where teachers can go through and look at their parent risk and make sure that they have the relevant controls in place that automatically lead to that cascading risk assessment of the parent risk in this case. You'll see what I mean in a sec when I jump into the demo. In terms of the risk workflow, what Plan Check Go provides is a tool through which we can do a guided pathway of steps to it for a teacher to go through in order to build their excursion risk profile and outline and identify their key risk controls that are in place. It can be saved along the way so that teachers can stop and come back to it and keep going at it a day later. It's all very dynamic in that way. Absolutely importantly, Plan Check Go also includes a provider due diligence and management section. And what this enables you to do as a school is to undertake due diligence on all of your different providers and vendors at the school, to send out questionnaires from Plan Check Go so that you can make sure that your different providers have all the things in place that they should have in place in order to provide their service to your school. That takes that out of the hands of teachers, and I see some schools where they're still asking teachers to go and undertake due diligence on a provider, and it can mean that it can be done centrally by administration in a school who can push out to all of the different providers and make sure all of their relevant accreditations, licenses, working with children checks, etc., are up to date and current at any point in time. We're very lucky to have developed an integration partnership with CareMonkey. We have many common school clients in particular, and that caused us, as we built Plan Check Go, to actually sit down with CareMonkey and look at the opportunity to provide an even better service to our clients by collaborating in and bringing a stronger product to market together. So just to give you some of the touch points on integration with CareMonkey, obviously schools go through planning and workflow approval for excursions, and Plan Check Go can enable that part of the process. Critically, CareMonkey always does the parental consent, and CareMonkey is the holder of the student record and the student medical information. Plan Check Go enables the comprehensive risk assessment and risk management that is unique to each excursion, and that clips in at that point. In terms of workflow, user workflow, here's a diagram from left to right that shows the steps required in the preparation and then management of an excursion. So you can see from the left, there's the proposal process. Then we go into CareMonkey where we select students, we identify the student, we have student medical information that's kept up to date by parents and school and so forth. We then have a pre-approval, and then we, through Plan Check Go, we undertake a risk assessment. Once final approval is given and parental consent is obtained via CareMonkey, we can go on our excursion, and then we have a post-excursion approach. So I've talked a lot about what Plan Check Go does in order to manage a safer excursion, undertake stronger risk assessments, but let's not forget some critical features of CareMonkey that are absolutely crucial for the management of safer excursions. And in particular, of course, CareMonkey manages the parental consent piece, and it also manages the excursion roll call, which of course you'll undertake on multiple occasions during the excursion. If an event or an incident does occur on an excursion, of course, it's through CareMonkey that we can access the student profile and medical record, and we can access all of the emergency contact information should we need to access that. So let's jump in now and have a quick demonstration of Plan Check Go. Okay, I've now moved over to the Plan Check Go homepage, and you can see at the top of this homepage, I've prepared an excursion to the Melbourne Zoo, which I did prior to this webinar. As I mentioned in the presentation just then, Plan Check Go is made up of the excursion planning, risk management, and pre and post excursion processes. I'm going to run through the excursion proposal quite quickly for this Melbourne Zoo excursion, but I'm going to give you an overview along the way of this proposal, so you can see the different steps, checks and measures that can be taken to ensure that we're running a well-planned and safe excursion. So if I just click into the overview itself, we can see straight away in this page on the overview that there's a whole bunch of information that pertains to that particular excursion, from the name and the type and who's going and things like that, all the way over on the right-hand side to things like the staff-student ratio and the budget associated with the excursion. I'll just jump into the live proposal to give you a little more information. On the proposal page, there again is the name and the excursion type. There are 3 different types of excursions through Plan Check Go. There's a day excursion, overnight excursion, international excursion. As we scroll down on this screen, you can see that we quickly get to the class and students. Now, really importantly, all of this information that when we select students is fed straight through from Plan Check Go. From CareMonkey. So as I click that is now integrating and pulling that information directly from CareMonkey, and I can then select or deselect different students or different classes in there to be able to go on that excursion. So there's all of those students who've been selected. In this case, we've called a lot of them by number rather than name, but there you go. So you can see how that works. So that then filters all of that information and feeds it straight through into Plan Check Go. And you can see that we've captured various other information in there as well. So as the teacher, I can go through all of that. I can save changes and submit all of that. Really importantly, if we look over on the left-hand side here, there are other screens where we can add further information as we go. I'm just going to take you to the summary quickly. As the teacher, I can now look at the summary of my excursion, and I can look at all of that information down as we go and just make sure that it's all in tip-top shape before I submit it through for approval. And there it's submitted for approval now. Now, once submitted for approval, my excursion is now, an email has gone off to my approver in my approval workflow. And that might be a business manager, a deputy principal, it might be an administrator in that case. We can now come back to the home screen, and as the approver, I can log into that excursion and I can now approve that at that point in time. So really importantly, this particular excursion has been pre-approved, and so we're now back into the excursion space. So in the excursion space, you can see as an improver, I can add more information into some of these other summary areas like parent care information and clothing and equipment and so forth. But from the excursion space is where now, as a teacher, I'm back into undertaking the risk assessment approach. So now I click on risk management and I'll say complete my risk assessment. So by clicking on risk management, it opens up our Safe Trip Builder risk assessment tool, and you can see straight away that from that, it's feeding the information from the application and proposal process, feeding that straight through. So I can see it's my Melbourne Zoo excursion. I can see it's a day excursion. Click continue. Straight away, I'm walking into the mandatory excursion checklist. Now, on every excursion that you undertake as a school, there are a series of what we'd call mandatory risk assessments and excursion checklists that should be completed. These are risks associated with these areas applied to every single excursion. So as you can see that list there, of course, in your school, you will have wider school policies that cover many of these areas like child protection, first aid, medical conditions, etc., etc. But in this case, these checklists drive you to bring that content to life with respect to this excursion. So if I just select child protection, you can see high level 5 key issues that need to be considered by the teacher in going through that and completing those checklists. I'll just select them all. Save that. You can see once saved, I've now got a green tick against the that specific checklist. So we'd normally work our way through each of the checklist items and click continue to go to the next section. That then takes me to the different risk categories. Now, based on the nature, type of excursion here, my risk categories will start to build out essentially a risk profile that enables me to undertake a risk assessment. So for starters, the first different category we need to select is transport. And in this case, I'm going to click on transport, and we are going to be going to Melbourne Zoo, and we're taking a rented minibus. But we'll also identify the fact that a teacher is driving a couple of students in his vehicle as well. So in that case, we've also picked on a driver. In this case, we've got some approved providers, and being Melbourne, we've got Melbourne Rental Coaches, which is an approved rental provider. And the person responsible is generally the teacher in charge, and in this case, we'll say we've only got one teacher in charge, that's Mr. Graham, who's in charge of that particular risk. As to the venues that we're going to, we are going to the zoo. So let's just have a look. Aquariums and zoos. We're going to go to the zoo, and we're going to once we get there, we're going to have a look at the approved providers. Which zoo are we going to? Actually, we're going to the Melbourne Zoo. So I can select that. Now, while we're at the zoo, there's also a museum next door. So I think we might go to the museum as well. So I'm going to click on that, and let's say that this particular museum is called the Australian Museum. So we're also going to go there as well. Person responsible, once again, Mr. Graham. Now, when we're there, we're going to have some food and beverages. We're going to assume that we are going to go to a takeaway outlet at the zoo. And we can click on those and simply say it's the on-site takeaway outlet at the zoo that we've already considered for the purposes of this excursion. Now, really importantly, we get to the activity section now. So when we look at activities, you'll recall from the presentation that we have many different activities that have been mapped out. And in this particular case, we're going to assume that while we're at the zoo, we're actually going to go for a swim in the nearby river. So I'm clicking on some aquatic activities, and we're going to say we're doing some open water sports while we're there. Let's just call it, let's say that we're doing a bit of water skiing, or let's just call it surfing on the nearby river. There's some fairly big tidal waves that day. We're going to say once again that we've got Mr. Graham responsible for that. And we're not doing any further outdoor education activities that require outdoor education providers at that point in time. So at this point, we can actually go back up, and we've selected all of those different activities and so forth. And that's helped to build out the risk profile for that particular excursion. Now, take note of the fact that with respect to each selection that we've made, a corresponding checklist has started to build out, and a corresponding policy pertaining to and applying to those different activities and selections. So if I click on the transport checklist, we now see that we've got a transport selection checklist here, as well as a safe driving checklist, because note we clicked on a rented minibus and we clicked on a car being driven, so that we can save the completion of that checklist. We've also built out a dynamic policy as we've selected that, which is our transport selection policy. And as I go further down into that policy, you can see coach, minibuses, transit buses, and then supervised driving of private vehicles, and a driving safety policy as well. So that if I'd selected walking, there would be a walking policy that would be built out there as well. And the same thing happens for all of those other selections. So in particular, you can see in the aquatic area, things like the checklist for open water sports that a teacher can now go through and make sure that they've completed that and they have the relevant controls in place for the excursion. So once we've gotten to the end of that, and we have all of our dynamic checklists and dynamic policies that have been built out to help around the controls for those specific risks, we can click continue. That will then take us into an additional information section, and this is where the teacher can upload additional risk assessments for other activities that we might not have covered, or additional specific or very specific risks that are unique to that excursion that aren't caught in here. Now, in this particular case, let's assume that at the zoo we're also going to undertake another activity that we haven't covered in Plan Go, and let's say it's falconry as an example. So we've undertaken a separate risk assessment for falconry for those who want a bird of prey landing on their arm, and we're going to upload that into here as well. And we'll just quickly jot in risk assessment for falconry. So we have it all in the one place, even though it might not yet be picked up and covered by Plan Check Go in this case. Again, hit continue, and we get toward the end of the excursion risk assessment process here. So looking from, in this case, right to left, you can see the pre-departure checklist. That's a day of, week of excursion checklist that a teacher will complete. You can see that it's quite a detailed checklist that covers those high-level areas that have to be, that teachers need to remind themselves of to make sure that they've got in place for the actual excursion. I'll just tick on the first three. What you can see when we do that is you can then export that as well. And so that a teacher might wish to take that as a PDF on the day, and we can see there's our pre-departure checklist as a PDF, etc., etc. What we also see on there, sorry, I'll just go back to the risk wizard. What we also see there is the ability to export all of our checklists and policies generally. Now, this is an important one because you might not wish to export all of your policies and all of your checklists. You might wish to only export a couple of them. Okay, for example, something to say your mandatory excursion checklist, your activities-based policies, and your activity-based checklist as well. So that could be something that a teacher could choose to do, or a school could set in stone. Of course, you could actually say, well, we want to export them all as well. Finally, the key bit is creating the risk assessment. Now, I like to link to a risk assessment all of the relevant checklists. I think that's good practice, and that shows the specific controls that are in place for that specific risk assessment. So in this case, all we need to do is create risk assessment, select export checklists, and now we've created a dynamic risk assessment for that excursion. What you can see from the top on that risk assessment is that it captures the name of the excursion. It then gives you the overall excursion rating of low and links all relevant checklists and policies to the overall rating. Then we go down a level where we display all of the relevant risk categories, noting that these are all parent risks. Beneath this is that sub-risk cascading risk methodology that drives to that risk assessment. And we note the person responsible, the likelihood and consequence, and then the linked checklists and policies that help to mitigate and control that risk. And as we go through, we can see all of the other categories that we've identified. So the venue-related risks, Melbourne Zoo, the checklist, the policies associated with that, food and beverage, the open water sports related risk, and then the additional information that I've added there as well, and that's the uploaded falconry risk assessment. As we keep going down the risk assessment, we see the risk assessment guide, which gives us our likelihood and consequence matrix and definitions, really important for those assessments. And then really importantly, we've also added all of the checklists, and you can see only one of those checklists have I completed as I went through this process. And so we've got all of those checklists linked to that particular risk assessment. So fairly simple, but very comprehensive beneath the hood, and quite a lot of complexity to get to that simple outcome that sits in behind this on the database. The main thing though is that the teacher's been able to go through a simple guided pathway that enables the teacher to produce this automated risk assessment at the other end. So once we've completed that, we can then click continue. And that will ask the teacher to give an acknowledgement and confirmation that they've read and understood the policies relevant to the excursion, and that they will implement and monitor the implementation of each of those controls and checklists that they've completed, okay? Really important step for every excursion, creates personal accountability for, in this case, Mr. Graham, who's the teacher in charge and the teacher preparing the actual risk assessment. So teacher clicks on that, hits save excursion, and then the teacher will then return to plan check go, where at that point they can actually go through and submit for approval. So once we get back to there and we submit that for approval, that will generate an email off to the approver, who will then be able to review the whole excursion plan, including the risk assessment. And you can see here, we're now looking at a risk management with a green tick that shows that that's all been completed. If I go back to the home page, and let's say I now log back in as an approver, and I will have just received an email, I can actually go in here and I'm in the excursion space. You can see all of the information at that point. Now, as the approver, I might wish to download the risk assessment, so I can click on the risk management link and go back in there and download that very easily. I might wish to review any of the information in the the planning and proposal process that's been completed by the teacher. I have the option of pushing the proposal back to a teacher to be able to provide further information, or I can simply approve it based on my assessment of all of the information that's there. As the teacher, once the excursion's approved, I get a notification to say that it's been approved, and I can log back in, and I'm taken now to that pre-departure menu where I have the whole pre-departure checklist there open for me to be able to complete prior to the excursion. So this is that critical step that is needed to be completed on the day of, week of excursion before the teacher can then go. So let's just say, for the sake of the exercise, that I've saved a few of those, and let's assume that I've actually completed all of those. I can then save that checklist and get ready to go on my excursion. Now, critically at this point in time is where I also send the parental consent after we've got that final approval. Given the integration with CareMonkey, by selecting Send Parent Consent, this is now creating and using one of the CareMonkey templates to actually send that consent out to the parent. So in this case, we're going to Melbourne Zoo. It's a day excursion. Here's a preview of the email that is going to the parent in this case, and it's picking up all of the information both from Plan Check Go and the student information from CareMonkey. I can simply hit Send Parent Consent, and that will generate the email direct from CareMonkey to the parent with all of the relevant information. So after we have that consent in place, we're now in a position to be able to go on the excursion. You'll see that I've part completed my pre-departure checklist at this point. I would go through and complete the rest of that checklist, and then I'm in a position to actually complete the excursion. So for the sake of the exercise, let's save all of those so that we've done them all. We can export that, of course, so that we have a PDF of it with us on the excursion. And now we can complete the excursion. So we go off on the excursion, we have a good time, and we see the animals, and we have a swim, and we do these things, and a bit of falconry as well. Now we're back in the excursion space, and it's post-excursion. So post-excursion, once I've safely returned and it's been completed, I can actually go through and upload any post-excursion information that I need to. This includes any excursion feedback, any incident reports, and any debriefing notes that we need to actually apply in there. In this case, we'll say we didn't have any feedback, but we did have an incident that we needed to report on. So you'll see by clicking on incident reporting, I can actually select the incident form, and I can upload the incident details here. We might have had a small safety incident when a student or a staff member fell over, and I can upload all of that information in there, and that works straight back through the assurance system. Alternatively, I might have a few debriefing notes that I also want to add in here, and it might be that the on-site food wasn't good enough, and next time we should take our own, or whatever the case may be. So that enables us to do all of that, and that finally enables us to complete the post-excursion checklist. Save the checklist, and now we've actually completed our excursion, and it's all logged and saved in Plan Check Go, and we can go back to that at any time that we need to actually see that data and information in there. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we actually undertake that excursion planning and risk assessment approach through Plan Check Go integrated with CareMonkey. And in our view, and in the view of CareMonkey, is a way in which we can both deliver a solution that's going to enable schools in a pretty simple way to ensure that they are running safer excursions for their students, which is absolutely critical and is our key goal here. I'll just pop back over to the slides now. And it's at this point that I'll leave on the screen for you a URL of a landing page should you wish to ask any questions, should you wish to make any comments or organise for us to show you this in more detail and consider how it might assist your school. I'd like to, at this point, thank everyone for their attention, and I hope that's been helpful to show you how Plan, Check, Go and CareMonkey working together can offer you the opportunity to run even safer excursions. And I'd especially like to thank our friends at CareMonkey for the great work that they do and for their efforts in collaborating with us to deliver this integrated product that we think is going to be able to provide a great benefit to the schools and critically to students who those schools teach and care for. Thank you all very much. We will, as I said, make this webinar available to you in the next couple of days. We will answer your questions and send out an FAQ response generally to everyone with answers to those questions, and you should expect that in the next 2 business days. Thanks again, and I wish you all a very good day.